Hello, welcome everybody to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation Series online. I'm Will Hopkins. I'm the director of New Hampshire Peace Action. If you are new to NHPA, we educate, mobilize, and organize to build a more peaceful and just future for all. We envisage a future where international relations are based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, and where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. The corona pandemic spurred us to start this bi-weekly conversation series as a way to continue our public education work. And we found it so effective that we've decided to continue on indefinitely. This every other Monday conversation series is intended for us to help engage and sort out how to make the changes that we've all been yearning for. In the spirit of understanding and respect, we'd like to acknowledge that we're doing our work here in New Hampshire on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples past and present. We honor with gratitude the land and waterways that they've been stewarding throughout the generations. Tonight, I'm very excited to have my friend Hassan. Hassan El Tayyab he works with the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and this year they've chosen ending the war in Yemen as their top priority for upcoming lobby efforts. With critical support from the US, a Saudi-led coalition and blockade in Yemen have created the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. It's pushing about 16 million people to the brink of famine. On February 4th, 2021, President Biden announced that the United States would end its support for the coalition's offensive operations in Yemen, but important aspects of US complicity are still taking place. Hassan is FCNL's legislative director for Middle East Policy. His passion for foreign affairs is rooted in his desire to make life better for people in the Middle East, including his extended family in Jordan, and for peace and stability worldwide. Prior to joining FCNL in August 2019, he was co-director of the national advocacy group Just Foreign Policy, played a major role in the successful passage of the War Powers Resolution to end U.S. military participation in the Saudi-led coalition's war and blockade in Yemen a couple of years ago. He's the co-author of a children's book called We Stand Up for What's Right, a story inspired by passage of the Yemen War Powers Resolution. And written to tell younger generations born after 9/11 who've never lived in an America not at war, that war is not the answer, not inevitable, and that there are better ways to resolve our differences. Hassan, I always enjoyed working with you when you were with Peace Action, Chicago area Peace Action, and when you were with Just Foreign Policy. Hassan has been generous with his time and has come to lobby meetings with me. Even after leaving Peace Action as a person on the Hill, he's been willing to come into lobby meetings with me. He's briefed our board on several occasions. I don't think this is the first time you've done the conversation series, even Hassan. But I know Hassan, for a lot of people in the peace movement, is somebody who we a lot of us want to be like Hassan when we grow up. He's somebody who, when he gets on something, he doesn't get off it, and he hits the hill. He finds out who has to be talked to, and he talks to them, and he changes policy. And he's somebody who inspires me to be a better activist and a better leader. And I'm really glad you're here tonight with us, Hassan. Thank you for taking some time.
Oh, thanks, Will. That was so sweet of you to say. And I've really appreciated your efforts and New Hampshire Peace Action's efforts. And you all are, a lesson in tenacity as well. I guess, would you like me to start now, or did you want to have another colleague speak before I jump in?
Well, we definitely want to give Sarah from FCNL team some time, but maybe, Sarah, would you prefer to speak now about the teams, or do you want to do that after?
That's a good question. I think people might be more inspired afterward, but I could speak now. I think that I know that Hassan will really make them care and want to be part of this. So I would let him speak first, and then I'll try to follow that.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you, Sarah, so much. And I really appreciate everything that your organization has done in support of the Yemen War Powers Resolution. We're actually at this really pivotal moment. March 26, 2022 marked the start of the eighth year of the Saudi-led war in Yemen, which has helped cause the deaths of nearly 500,000 people and push millions more to the edge of starvation. And with continued U.S. military support, Saudi Arabia has really escalated its campaign of collective punishment on the people of Yemen in recent months, making this actually one of the deadliest time periods of the entire war. Earlier this year in January, Saudi airstrikes targeted a migrant detention facility and vital communications infrastructure, killed at least 90, wounded 200 more, and triggered a nationwide internet blackout. Now we are, gripped and transfixed as a nation, as a world at what's happening in Ukraine. And given the Biden administration's strong condemnation of Russia's ruthless and illegal invasion of Ukraine, it's very shocking to me, and not shocking, but it's hypocritical that we would continue to support a similar, a merciless assault on the people of Yemen by Saudi Arabia. And after 7 years of both direct and indirect military involvement, the U.S. needs to end its military aid, its weapons, its spare parts, its maintenance, and logistical support. Right now, in Yemen today, we're seeing 20.7 million people in need of urgent humanitarian aid, and now up to 19 million Yemenis food insecure. And the famine numbers for children have really increased as well as Saudi has tightened its blockade. The war in Yemen, not just, the hypocrisy of the way it's being covered and compared to, wars like, Afghanistan and Yemen and Syria, which aren't getting the attention it deserves. Ukraine is having a direct impact on Yemen. Yemen imports 27% of its wheat from Ukraine and 8% from Russia. The UN actually warned the famine numbers we're seeing could actually, increase fivefold. So in the second half of 2022, as wheat import shortages worsen, on top of the Saudi blockade, we discussed earlier that yes, Biden announced an end to military aid to the Saudi-led coalition, but unfortunately, the devil's kind of in the details, and he never defined what was offensive, what was defensive, and approved over $1 billion of new weapon sales to the Saudis, including attack helicopters, air-to-air missiles, and a recent announcement that we're going to send Patriot batteries to Saudi in exchange for oil. This sends a message of impunity, and it's really high time Congress take action. I'm very excited to share with you all that Rep. DeFazio and Jayapal, they have announced their plans to introduce and pass a new Yemen War Powers Resolution to end unauthorized military aid to the Saudi-led coalition's campaign. They wrote in the statement in February that that Biden had pledged to end support for the war, and now it's time to follow through on the commitment. I'm excited to share, in case you missed it, on Friday, they doubled down on their support for introduction and did a statement with Bernie and Roe. So they are all now calling for a new Yemen War Powers Resolution. I'm in the process of circulating a sign-on letter of national organizations and hoping to move that forward and get this off the ground. I feel really good about the momentum we have. So I think with that, that's kind of my presentation to you all. We have done this. This community knows how important it is to end U.S. complicity in this war. You've worked at it. We have a lot of momentum. Last year, we had over 100 members of Congress write the administration saying the Saudi blockade must end. We had a 219-member majority in the House pass an NDAA provision saying it's time to end U.S. complicity. They listed spare parts, maintenance, intel sharing, logistical support. That got a majority. So we are well within our position. I mean, to take similar text and then to try to push it through on the House side, and hoping that we'll get a Senate companion. I'll also say that, putting aside U.S. politics for a second, there's a lot going on the ground on Yemen with regards to small but hopeful rays of light through the darkness here. Yemen's Houthi militia announced a 3-day ceasefire during the month of Ramadan, which gives me some hope that there is still a pathway for peace. They also agreed to a massive prisoner swap in the past 48 hours or so, where there's going to be close to 1,000 Yemeni soldiers swapped with almost 1,000 Houthi militias soldiers as well, and including 16 Saudi soldiers, 3 Sudanese soldiers. And the swap will also see the release of Nasser Hadi, the brother of Yemeni President Mansour Hadi. So I think that's a really positive step. Again, it's not where we need to go, but it seems like things are at least trending in that direction. Obviously this weekend we saw, escalation, as these peace talks are happening. On the other side, there are bad indications that Saudis did an airstrike, killing 8. The Houthis launched cross-border attacks into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, hit an Aramco facility. So it's certainly mixed, but we have a role to play here in the United States. And it's long been my philosophy that unlike so many other issues in this world that are devastating, this is one of them that we can do something about. This is something that we have agency over. We want to see an end to the Ukraine war. We need to engage there, but we are literally giving the weapons, and the military aid to the Saudis as they launch airstrikes into Yemen. So we are supporting the Putin side of the war in Yemen. So that's, in Mohammed bin Salman and in the Saudi-led coalition. So it's something that we have agency over. It's something that we can do. We've done it before. In 2018, 2019, we passed the Yemen War Powers Resolution. We are truly at a historic moment. We've never had a situation quite like this where Congress had stated that they, had passed something. The president ran on it. All 3 chambers are controlled by the Democrats. Now Democrats are pursuing a war powers resolution. What's going to happen? It kind of depends on New Hampshire peace action. What can y'all do to help us get this over the finish line? Shaheen is critical. You know that. And that's why I'd love to jump into all your questions, because I'm sure a lot of this is going to be advocacy focused.
All right, so folks, you can feel free to stick your questions in the chat, or you can either use the hand raise function or put an asterisk in the chat, and I will call on you and you can ask your question yourself. So Hassan, I'm actually going to have a meeting. So we'll go with Amy's question first, because it feeds into mine if we get to mine. So Amy said, in what way is Shaheen pivotal? So just most of us understand Shaheen's role in the Senate, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, Shaheen's pivotal for a number of reasons. We want all senators. We want Senator Hassan, who has a great last name. At one time I met your senator and I was like, your last name is my first name. And she says, that is very cool. Let's have a conversation. We talked about Yemen. It was fantastic. But they're both important. But obviously, Senator Shaheen is on the Foreign Relations Committee, a key committee that gets to decide U.S. foreign policy and and she's also been engaged on Yemen before. So I think upping that advocacy, getting the Northeast consolidated here. Your House members obviously important. Pappas is very important. and getting him on as an original co-sponsor. I think now's the time to sort of forward that along, and just keep pushing.
So I'm not seeing any asterisks or new questions in the chat yet. I'm gonna go ahead and stick my question in, and that is, I actually have a meeting with several Shaheen staffers scheduled for tomorrow, and the subject is nuclear weapons. We weren't planning on going into Yemen, but anytime you have a meeting, you always have an opportunity to add a few other things. What bill should I have them look at?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. There right now we don't have a bill introduced. There's not an official HR thing that we can point to. But you could flag for them the CPC statement that Bernie, Rowe, Jayapal, DeFazio all signed, and say, hey, I just wanted to bring this to your attention. It seems like the House and Senate might be moving on a new Yemen War Powers resolution. We'd love a public statement of support from Senator Shaheen. We think that would be, we want to applaud this statement, calling for an end to U.S. complicity and an end to the Saudi blockade of Yemen that's cutting off the flow of food, fuel, medicine, and clean water. So I think that's fantastic if you can slip that into your meeting. And I know there's so many pressing issues, but like I said, we want to keep Yemen on the agenda here. I have a couple more things. If folks want to ask questions, I really want to encourage that. But I think one thing I didn't really tease apart and kind of explain in enough detail was the Saudi blockade of Yemen. Now, what do we mean by the Saudi blockade? So this really is the main driver of the humanitarian suffering. So if you remember the pandemic early on, where you had all these supply chain shortages, prices inflating, everyone's talking about the energy prices going up. Imagine that times 1,000. That's exactly what's happening in Yemen. The supply chain is really impacting prices, impacting access, impacting folks' ability to even move around the country freely. And you have a situation where the Saudis have cut off the flow through the ports of Hodeidah and Port Salif and then Sana'a Airport. So these three critical ports of entry. U.S. warplanes, or U.S. military aid for Saudi warplanes, I should say, are helping keep that blockade in place. So when we're talking about ending support for the war and blockade, that's really what we mean. And this fuel trying to get into the country, these are UN-approved ships that are unable to dock, and they're stuck in these coalition holding areas for a long time. And as a result, you're not able to get in, the supplies you need. You can't transport food. Hospitals can't function in the proper way, and it's really exacerbating everything. So I see a couple other questions in the chat. Aside from counting on Congress to act meaningfully in this way, what else can we do? Marcus, I think that's a great question. I mean, one, your voice is your vote. You should be reaching out to members of Congress, urging that they speak out. I think LTEs and op-eds are a fantastic way to engage, writing into the local papers, organizing a coalition of like-minded folks. Maybe a faith coalition. I know there's some people of faith on this. Has your pastor spoken out, or your reverend, or rabbi, or whoever your person, the faith leader is that you are connected to. And that's something that we've done quite a bit at the national level with FCNL. We're about to put out, hopefully, a statement between two national faith leaders, so you can do that at the local level. There's also, funding and fundraising. I set up a little Lemonade for Yemenade stand at a show I did. I'm also a musician, and actually I can't take credit. I didn't start the Lemonade for Yemenade. I came up with the idea, but it was actually my bass player's daughter. She's 11 years old. She set up the stand. She was rocking that. She raised like $80, and we gave it all to Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, who is my favorite humanitarian organization working on the ground in Yemen. Aisha Juman is the president. She does a lot of advocacy on war powers and other things like that in the U.S., but she has all these volunteers on the ground. And so it's all locally sourced goods, Yemenis working to support other Yemenis, which is what I like to hear. So that could be another thing to do, is trying to, raise a little bit of money, raise some awareness for this. The last thing I'll say on that, because it's such a good question, I always have things for people to do. There is an incredible film. In case, have folks seen Hunger Ward? I see a couple thumbs up. This is an Oscar-nominated film. It's about a hunger clinic in the south of Yemen, and it follows the story of this family and these children that are in the hunger ward suffering from acute malnutrition. It's heartbreaking, but we have partnered with them for this Yemen War Powers push. So, getting people to watch the film and then, having a discussion afterwards about what we need to do to take action could be another great way to engage your community. Okay, maybe you should read the questions.
Will do. So Sarah asks, can you explain how the attacks increase and decrease when the U.S. acts? Sarah, do you want to unmute and say a little more about that, or?
Well, I think it's interesting that when we pass these war powers resolutions, and that if we even start talking about them, that there is a kind of a direct relationship between the amount of attacks that are going on, and not so that the U.S. support seems to be crucial in what's going on there, and so. I think there's some really good evidence that just speaking out about it has a direct impact on how many people are being attacked.
Yeah, Sarah Smith, thank you. I want to elaborate it because she's right. In 2018, we saw a massive increase in airstrikes. We saw really an escalation in violence. And Congress, Senator Bernie Sanders, Mike Lee, and Chris Murphy, they passed SJ Res 54, that first Yemen War Powers resolution. And literally the same day, they agreed that the Stockholm Agreement, or the Hodeidah ceasefire, was agreed to. And Trump also announced an end to mid-air refueling of Saudi warplanes. So both of these things happened. Granted, it was a shaky ceasefire. I'm not trying to say it was kumbaya, but there was an advancement of diplomacy. And then the following year, in 2018, in April, we saw Congress take more votes, and then we saw the UAE actually draw down their forces militarily. So the UAE then began to say, wow, this is a PR nightmare for us. We don't want to continue to get slammed in the press by the U.S. media, as they cover these successful votes through both chambers. So they drew down. We actually saw airstrikes then come way down. The cross-border attacks came to an all-time low at the end of 2019. And at the same time, a lot of us were working on these NDAA provisions to cut off weapon sales, to end military support. So, Trump vetoed the war powers, but then we were trying to do it through NDAA. And there was a moment where no one knew what was going to happen. Was the U.S. going to literally ground the entire Saudi air fleet? And the Saudis, that plus the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi really, put them on their back heels. I think they started to pursue realistic diplomacy. There was, we were going to see peace talks in Kuwait. And then unfortunately, Congress stripped out those provisions in the NDAA, and you literally see a massive uptick in violence. Now, another thing that we haven't discussed is that there was a GEE group of eminent experts that had this UN accountability mechanism in Saudi. They issued 4 reports since 2018. In each report, they said all the, everybody needs to stop giving weapons and military aid to the warring parties. They said that 4 years in a row. And then in October 2021, Saudi, lobbied the UN and lobbied, different country and member states on the UN, and actually got that accountability mechanism removed. And since that date, and it coincided with a bunch of weapon sales that the Biden administration announced, then we saw an even a greater increase of airstrikes. I'm just looking at the graph and data. Anel Shalin from the Quincy Institute recently put together some really important graphics. If folks can see, it's like a 100-page Yemen brief that has a lot of this data in there. So between the message of impunity through the ongoing aid and weapon sales and through dismantling this UN accountability mechanism, we are seeing, massive escalation by the Saudis. Again, it's, some of the most sustained bombing. We're in the most sustaining bombing period in the past 4 years. So that's why we think moving forward, doing this Yemen War Powers resolution, and, it's hard to know what the cause of certain things are. But, now that we've got Jayapal, DeFazio, Bernie Rowe being very vocal about moving forward with the War Powers resolution, I think you're going to, hopefully, that'll put wind in the sails of these the Ramadan ceasefire proposal by the Houthis, and we can see some success there. And Saudis will be more incentivized to take those talks seriously.
So just call folks' attention to a few things in the chat. Doreen asked about if we could have the name of the Aid and Relief Agency again. And just before, she said that Jinnah had put Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation and a link, yemenfoundation.org, in the chat. So that's there right ahead of Doreen's question. It came in. I also want to just call folks' attention. Jinnah put in link to the Hunger Ward, the film you mentioned, and Sarah put a link into the Quincy Institute report. Can you give an update, Hassan? I know for the last couple of years, the leading cause of death in Yemen has been cholera, followed by starvation. Is that? Can you give us an update on the cholera epidemic? Is that still raging at the same levels?
Yes, the cholera epidemic is still raging, and what's tragic about cholera is that all you need to cure cholera is clean water, and some antibiotics. And so early on in the war, what Saudi Arabia did is they targeted sewage treatment plants and all this water infrastructure. A thing I didn't mention in my opening is that Saudi Arabia, again in January, attacked a reservoir in Sada in the north of the country and cut off water to 120,000 people. In this hunger crisis, in this epidemic, this cholera epidemic that's going on, with COVID going on, Saudi Arabia is deliberately targeting water infrastructure. It's just devastating, and it's just one more reason to say no to U.S. support for this aggression.
Where do you get numbers? Does the Quincy Institute report have any numbers, or do you have a place that has numbers on casualties in Yemen? I know that it's very hard for aid and relief workers to get in and hard to get good data, and that there's a lot. I've heard 500,000 over the 7 years. I've heard 120,000 in 2020. Do you know where do you go for numbers on what's actually happening and data?
Yeah, so the UN is probably our best, source. They said that 377,000 people had died in the war in Yemen so far, so almost 500,000 people. But 60% of those were killed by indirect causes, from hunger, from cholera, from these diseases. And that to me is just so alarming, and that's why we've been pounding on the Saudi blockade for so long, because that is really a massive driver of this humanitarian crisis. A few more recent statistics. A new UN report indicated that 2.2 million children under the age of 5 suffered from acute malnutrition. Are expected to suffer from acute malnutrition over the course of 2022. And last year was 400,000 children faced severe acute malnutrition. So now that number is 538,000. It is just, we're going orders of magnitude higher because of this ongoing blockade. And what's sad to say is things have actually gotten worse under Biden. This is I hate to say it, but a pretty cynical thing to do is to come out, announce that you're ending military aid to the Saudi-led coalition, keeping important aspects. And I didn't really stress this enough, but just the spare parts and maintenance alone are keeping these Saudi warplanes in the air and allowing them to do these aerial operations, including attacking the airport, launching airstrikes at these detention facilities. And they need the almost daily transfer of spare tires just to be able to take off the runway. So the idea that we don't have leverage is just one that we can't accept. We have a lot of leverage, and we need to exert that leverage to get Saudi to become a better actor. And to be honest, after 7 years of war, the Houthis have essentially all but won the war. We haven't talked, about the status of what's happening, but they now govern territory with 80% of the population. And, this ongoing military aid is just creating the situation where it becomes a quagmire and it can never stop. And so that's why it's so important to use this lever that we have in the ongoing spare parts, maintenance, logistical support, so we can extricate ourselves, but also to try to unlock this quagmire and hopefully get the Houthis and the Saudis and the Hadi government and the STC to agree that we need peace in Yemen.
So I'm going to go with LR's question next, and then I'll go back to Richard's. So LR asks, how do legislators and policymakers outside of their silence express their support, or how do they defend their support of the Saudi-led coalition?
I don't know if I understand. Are you saying what do people that want to what do people?
So we've been supporting. So we've been supporting for several years, and correct me if I'm wrong, LR. We've been supporting for the 7 years the Saudi government. How do lawmakers defend themselves when they have taken votes? We've seen certainly when the NDAA has passed almost every year, we see the NDAA goes in with amendments to. And provisions to stop funding, and sometime during the negotiations, those get negotiated away, and they get put back in, and we're back to supporting Saudi Arabia. So how do the folks who are pushing on the other side defend that?
Well, it's everybody's going to say something a little different. They'll be ducking, they'll be dodging. It's coming. And I think what's important is to kind of root ourselves back into, we are complicit. What you hear some people say is that, it's anything from we need to, keep the oil flowing. We are in an energy crisis, and that's important. You see some people say, hey, we agree with you, but this isn't the right vehicle. Why don't you try Arms Export Control Act? Because that has more to do with spare parts and maintenance in these contracts. So let's do it there. What they're not telling you is that there's no pathway for success that way. We want a floor vote. We want an expedited vote and get this thing on the floor. So sometimes they'll there's obviously a lot of political pressure to keep the status quo going. We know this. We've pushed through that before. But you hear all sorts of things. Some people say, well, Saudi Arabia, there's an important ally, or the Houthis are the ones being the aggressor. You hear that quite a bit. Okay, I'm like, well, if you compare the number of airstrikes and air raids to Houthi drone attacks, it ain't even close. So if you just look at the data, and how many airstrikes are falling on Yemen in comparison. You're talking not even a fraction, a small fraction of the amount. And really, what I think what the person is asking might also, they might also want to know what we should be saying. And I think, we can acknowledge that the Houthis or Iran, aren't, necessarily doing everything right either. They're obstructing humanitarian aid. They're also committing war crimes and atrocities. And we don't support that either. We support ending all the war. We want a nationwide ceasefire. We want diplomacy. And, for that to happen, we really need to own our side of the street. That's how, things get resolved, is that, you take your, issues and you sort those out. And then hopefully, we can work diplomatically to sort out the other issues. But right now we're complicit. And, I'll just leave with this. I was in a meeting with Senator Risch, and not a staff, with the guy. I'm sitting at a table like 2 feet, away from him. I'm saying all this stuff, and I'm saying we've got leverage. And they said, "What about the Russians? What about the Chinese?" And and then a constituent, who I think it was her first lobby visit, raised her hand and said, "Senator, I don't want my tax dollars funding the Saudi war in Yemen." And he just stopped, and he said, "Well, I can't argue with that." That was the thing that cut through this whole meeting. Everything I know, everything I've done, and all the background didn't even matter. What mattered was constituents telling their senators that they want to end U.S. complicity. We don't want our tax dollars funding this. And I think that's just an important message, that your voice matters so much in these conversations.
All right. I'll read. I think it was Richard's question, and then I'll let Amy ask her question. So Richard says, "How many people in Yemen have been killed by U.S. drone strikes?" It's a pretty small number, right? It's usually targeted. It's assassinations, essentially, right?
Yeah. I don't have that figure off the top of my head. But I will say that we sort of we've bifurcated sort of this whole conversation. There's a U.S. war happening against Al Qaeda, and that's another tragic thing. And we also have the Saudi-led war in Yemen. So Congress understands this as two separate things. But thousands of people have been killed by U.S. drone strikes in Yemen, and that's another issue. And to really address that, we have to really come to terms with the 2001 AUMF, the War on Terror AUMF, and do what we can to repeal and not replace that.
I had no idea it was thousands. Thank you for sharing that. Amy, why don't you go ahead and...
Sure, thanks. So some of us were recently looking at an article that Democracy Now! Put out, in which Sarah Whitson, I believe, executive director of Democracy for the Arab World Now, said that U.S. forces have recently been actively participating in firing missiles into Yemen, and that this is a huge change. Have you heard it? I think a lot of us were shocked and wanted to know more about that. And
yeah,
can you say?
So, as I understand it, I think what she might have been referring to is that the U.S. is in Abu Dhabi now using Patriot missile batteries to actually shoot down Houthi drones. So Houthi drone attacks are coming into Abu Dhabi, they're firing them, and under international law, we then legally become a party to the conflict as international law is concerned. And that's a change. But what I say is we've been supporting on these Saudi Air Force bases and coordinating with the Saudis. So I do think that it's increased escalation, but there have been similar activities where we're participating in the defense of Saudi Arabia via these warplanes, via these Patriot missile batteries. And but yeah, she makes a good point. That's and also begs the question: what if one of these contractors or U.S. service members were hit in the line of duty and killed? Would that further entangle the United States into this war? And I think it's such an important question that we've never really had there hasn't been a proper vote and debate on whether or not this military support should happen. And that's why it's so important, I think, to call the Article 1 Article 1 Section 8 of the Constitution into question here. Like, is the executive branch violating the War Powers Act in Article 1 by keeping U.S. forces engaged in hostilities via this these Houthi drone attacks going into Abu Dhabi? But I don't think I saw that whole clip. So if someone wants to share that in the chat, I would love to. Love to see it.
All right. So next question's from Donna San Antonio. We've seen enormous humanitarian aid and support for Ukrainian refugees coming into the U.S. and various European countries. Can you please speak about what refugees from Yemen and other non-Western countries are facing?
Yeah. So the issue in Yemen, is a lot of folks, because of the blockade, because of the closure of Sana'a airport to civilian traffic, people can't leave. So we now have 4 million people internally displaced inside Yemen. So the number of refugees flowing outside the country is very small. But the internally displaced people are very large, and millions of people. So that kind of suffering, and many of them have actually fled 3 or 4 times because fighting has escalated, and then they moved again, and then fighting escalated and had to move again. So you're not seeing that kind of attention put on these Yemeni diaspora or Yemeni internally displaced people, and it's pretty sad. The coverage, I will just say as an aside here, the coverage that we're seeing of Ukraine, to me, is racist. It's not okay to be covering a war between white people as we're ignoring people of color around the world that are being impacted by war, and impacted by a war that we are funding, we are militarily supplying, and it's, I think the media wants to frame everything as, we have got good guys and bad guys, and we define who the good guys are, we define who the bad guys are, whenever it meets our geopolitical and strategic interests. And I think people are waking up and are hip to the idea that, we are complicit too. And I think that's why this war in Yemen is just so, now more than ever, not just for the humanitarian implications, but just for setting the record straight that the U.S. has to get its own house in order with regards to human rights around the world.
I've had the thread that you were just on, reminds me of conversations we've had about, the Putin, now a war criminal, should be arrested and tried for war crimes. And I've frequently, when people have brought that up, have said yes, and his cellmate should be Henry Kissinger, and across the hall should be George W. Bush and Barack Obama. And and usually that doesn't go over very well with folks, but it's the reality that we are treating some victims of war very differently begs us and encourages us to want to look at why we're looking at.
Yeah, and I will say that I think it's really good in a way that the media, it's not that I don't want the media to be covering what's happening in Ukraine. I think it's actually really good for Americans to see what happens to the victims of war. It's a horrible, horrible scene, and their stories deserve to be told. The thing is, and we don't often get that. We often get the side of the U.S., did this intervention, but we toppled Gaddafi, but it was good for the people. And we're not seeing the other perspective. Now there's slave markets in the streets in Libya, or we have to go get Saddam Hussein, and not really telling the stories of, what the Iraqis were feeling on the other end of that. And the million people that died as a result of that war. So I think this could be a real consciousness expanding moment for the United States, but we have to keep it on the agenda. And I think that's why, getting Yemen more attention here is just so important.
I think is really well said. Lot to think about there. There are a couple comments I can read off as we wait for folks to come through with questions. So Sarah said, it seems like the strikes on hospitals are so similar to what's happening in Ukraine. It gives us a graphic window on what this kind of war is like. And I would argue that it's what all war is like. We have this idea that war can be clean and only combatants are affected. And that's not what war is, especially modern warfare. It is it's devastating to the people who experience it from any position. Amy, go ahead.
Thanks. So let me try to wrap my head around what you were just saying about kind of the good guys, bad guys, the victim, oppressor, us, them. That is feeling so strong right now. And I know a lot of us that I see here, when we try to say, wait, there's a larger picture, there's other pieces to look at, we're met with a lot of anger. And I was reading something and it said something about we must be in solidarity with the innocent Ukrainians. And that really blew my mind, because first of all, I mean, why is anyone more innocent than anyone else necessarily here? And I think, we don't think anyone should be bombed, whatever they have done. But kind of getting to this place of expansion with people, it seems to really be rattling folks. Do you have any thoughts about how are you successfully or, finding ways to engage with people and, without being too blamey, like help them? I think you probably know what I mean. You go ahead.
Well, I look forward to working with you all, to kind of move this whole conversation forward, because, we're trying to shift consciousness of, hundreds of millions of people. I mean, we didn't sign up for this because it was easy. I think, continuing to be dogged, persistent, respectful, following up with facts and information, other perspectives, highlighting the voices of the impacted, continuing to try to engage, and all the things that, Peace Action has been doing, needs to continue. I don't think that, I don't know specifically, maybe if you wanted to say more about like a specific, interaction, or some, like who was angry with you? Was it a lawmaker? Was it like a colleague?
Yeah, let's go with colleague.
Okay.
Yeah, not lawmakers, more, people that we are, that some of us are used to working with on other sort of progressive issues, and feel like we're usually on the same page, and suddenly feel like this hostility from them.
Yeah, and and we're up against a lot. I mean, we have CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, New York Times, Washington Post. They are all pumping out a narrative. And, on the Ukraine situation, we have to pick our battles carefully, at this point, and really try to, figure out what do we need to do to end this crisis, and like coming together on that. Now, I think negotiations are so critical. If I could just take the Middle East hat on, put the Ukraine hat on for a quick second, I think getting down to like, what are we asking for in this moment? I think we need to center diplomacy. We need a negotiated solution, and diplomacy can't just mean advancing American primacy. When we say diplomacy, we don't mean like, well, the, intelligence, they might have botched Afghanistan. Forget that. Don't think about that anymore. Let's just think about how awesome it was that the intelligence agency, CIA, released this classified material to all of these European nations. So then they were able to come together and then, stand up to Putin and Russia. Well, diplomacy, that's diplomacy, but diplomacy is also like coming to a negotiated settlement and an eventual peace. And right now, the U.S. is in a pure punishment mindset with regards to Ukraine. And what's best for the Ukrainian people? Not that. They need off-ramps. They need a pathway to a diplomatic settlement. They need diplomacy. Zelensky has called for diplomacy. I don't agree with everything he's said. I don't agree with the no-fly zone. I think that would obviously, be a massive risk. But he has said he wanted the West to engage in, direct talk. So that's kind of, I think, our place right now, trying to get to beyond that with people. You pick the people you kind of have like larger conversations about, like buffer state, neutral Ukraine, what happens to the Donbass, Crimea, etc. But really, our message needs to be clear that we support a diplomatic settlement.
All right, we got a couple more questions in the chat in few more minutes. We can at least get through these last two before we turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit about how folks can utilize the FCNL team structure in New Hampshire to help do some Yemen work. First one from Chris Hansen. Are there ways to challenge the news blockade, which prevents us from knowing the extent of the suffering in Yemen?
I love that term, a news blockade. An information blockade. I love that. Well, I don't love that it exists. I love that you came up with a term to use for it. Get your voice out there. You've got social media platforms. I just read an article that there are these like 200 TikTok people that have 500 million followers. 500 million followers. You realize that that's more than MSNBC. MSNBC gets like 3 million in a night or something. We're talking 500 million people. So let's get creative. Let's publish your LTEs, your op-eds, make selfie videos, get other people to make these videos, and doing webinars like this is a way to cut through the noise. I think this is exactly the right way to go forward. This is just an aside, but I want to get the peace movement, rocking out some more. So like contact local musicians in your area, host events, get them to play for you and sing and dance. I don't even care if it's a political song they're singing. Just have it be a way to commune and then again cut through this master narrative of the news blockade, which I now love that term.
So in addition to that answer, Tim Bowman recommends using Presearch or Brave, so using alternative search engines. I don't know if that's. I don't know, Tim. Do you want to say more about that?
I will say the Intercept is also really good. The Young Turks. I was just on the Young Turks recently. Al Jazeera is putting good stuff out there. So there are good sources. Just know that you're not going to find it. Sorry, Tim. I cut you off. Go ahead.
Not hearing Tim, I'm gonna read Betsy's question off. So Betsy says, "Do you think Biden should talk with Putin to negotiate a ceasefire? Do you think we should be doing direct, leaders? Should those two leaders be directly talking right now?"
Yes, I think so. I think they should be talking. Obviously Biden can't, decide for Ukraine what happens. But we do need to have, direct communication, even just to have a de-escalation hotline going. I know that, there is some coordination between the U.S. military and the Russian military, but we need more engagement, not less. I think, I just think it's absolutely critical that there's, the West is working, to support diplomacy and try to resolve this. Because right now, that I don't know if you all saw, you probably did, but if you want to be generous, calling it a gaffe, that we essentially want Putin out of power, which essentially is calling for regime change. And that is dangerous. That kind of rhetoric is extremely dangerous and not what we need right now. We need pathways, we need off ramps for sanctions to be made clear. Like, what does Putin have to do for us to see an end to sanctions? That needs to be articulated by the White House.
All right, I'm going to give you a chance to give some last thoughts in a minute, but I do want to make sure we get Sarah in here. So, Sarah, as you come on, we have weekly email blasts, and we're going to be continuing to push on Yemen. But if you want to get more involved, you want to get involved with a team that's working directly to impact legislators on Yemen, who should you get in touch with depending on where you are? How do we find the FCNL teams that are focused on this work in New Hampshire? Sarah, go ahead.
Hi. Thanks, Will. We have our teams all joined together. So we have basically one team for New Hampshire, which was aided by the switch to Zoom virtual lobbying, and there is a join a team function on the an advocacy team function on the FCNL website, but I'm going to put my email here too, so you just directly contact me to join a team. And let me tell you about the teamwork that we do, because I'm really excited about it. This is we're one of 125 teams in 44 states right now. And this makes it a big coordinated campaign. This is not just one or two people talking. And we've been working for 3 years to build these relationships with our members of Congress, and learning how to work with the media. And we get together as a team, which is really cool. We've all joined together, and so it's not just like a random group getting together, so that this whole thing is fostering this whole team approach and what we call building relationships with our members of Congress and their staff, and if you do join a team, we spend the majority of our time either planning a lobby visit or going to lobby visits with these. So we've done 2 lobby visits so far this year with Papa's staff and with Custer's staff, and our next step will be the senators. But we may repeat this throughout the year until something breaks in this. But the other cool thing is that being part of this team, we learned a lot from FCNL about how to be an advocate, how to tell our stories, how to be effective when we're lobbying, and benefit from frequent updates from people like Hassan, who's really keeps us well informed. Oftentimes these teams are educating the members of Congress. They don't have time to keep up with everything, and so they thank us. They thank us for coming in and bringing this information in. It's really a vital thing that's happening, and I think Hassan even mentioned that when they're strategizing about this, and maybe you can tell the story better than I can, about how the FCNL teams have become a factor in how they look at this effort right now. Do you want to explain that story?
Yeah. So right now, the Jayapal office, they put together memos of, okay, we're going to brief the boss. This is our chance to say, who supports the war powers, who doesn't, like what's the political viability. And, I'll say that, FCNL, these advocacy teams around the country, they've done more lobby visits on Yemen than any other issue in their history in the past few months. And it's just been a massive outpouring. And so those lobby numbers, the amount of lobby visits that are happening are, going right to the highest levels of our, the CPC, and they are all really keeping track of this as they decide when to introduce this bill. I will say maybe I'll save the best news for last. I actually had some great news. I didn't even share it with you. How rude of me. Rep. Adam Schiff just became an original co-sponsor of the Yemen War Powers Resolution. So this is the House Intelligence Chairman. We are cooking with solar panels here. I don't want to say gas anymore because we are getting off of fossil fuels, off of these authoritarian petrostates. Anyway, Sarah, thank you for that and for all your incredible work and keeping Yemen on the agenda.
Well, thank you so much, Hassan, for being with us tonight. I do want to say if you're nervous about lobbying, you want to dip your toes in a little bit, Sarah Freeman-Wilpert, who also works for FCNL, did a presentation on how to do lobby visits. You can check it out on our YouTube channel. Seeing gratitude in the chat, Hassan. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Thank you so much, Hassan, for talking us through it, and I can't wait until the next time we have you.
Thanks, y'all. Really appreciate this conversation.